The mining station's corridors echoed with Marcus John's footsteps as he navigated through the debris-scattered passageways. 3 years had passed since the Terran Covenant War ended, but the scars remained etched across the galaxy like infected wounds. Marcus carried his own a jagged line across his left temple and the weight of countless patients he couldn't save. The abandoned Kepler 442b mining facility was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place to forget the screams of dying soldiers and the smell of burnt flesh. His medical scanner detected unusual heat signatures deeper in the station's lower levels. Standard protocol dictated reporting anomalies to the Reconstruction Authority, but Marcus had learned to distrust protocols. The war had taught him that survival often meant breaking rules. He descended through maintenance shafts, his emergency kit bouncing against his hip, following the readings toward what appeared to be a hidden chamber. The corridor opened into a vast cavern that shouldn't have existed according to the station's blueprints. Bioluminescent vines cascaded down the walls like living curtains, pulsing with soft blue and purple light. The air hummed with an otherworldly energy that made his skin tingle. But it was the movement in the shadows that froze his blood. Eyes, dozens of them, reflected his flashlight beam from the darkness. Not human. Eyes. They glowed with colors he'd never seen before. Deep amber, shifting silver, and haunting violet. As his vision adjusted, he began to make out small figures pressed against the cavern walls, their forms alien yet unmistakably childlike. Some had crystalline protrusions along their limbs. Others possessed gossamer wings that trembled with fear. A few seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as if the very act of being perceived caused them pain. The silence stretched between them, heavy with terror and uncertainty. Marcus had encountered alien species during the war, but only as combatants or casualties. These were children refugees who had somehow survived the systematic destruction of their worlds. Their body language spoke of trauma deeper than any physical wound. One creature, no taller than his waist, emitted a series of rapid clicks while patterns of light danced across its translucent skin. Others huddled together, making sounds that might have been whimpers in any language. Marcus slowly lowered his flashlight and raised his empty hands. The gesture was universal. He hoped a sign of peaceful intent. Several of the children recoiled further into the shadows, but one remained fixed on him. This one appeared older, with 4 arms and skin that shifted between gray and deep blue. Intricate scarring covered its torso in patterns that seemed deliberate, ritualistic. "I'm not here to hurt you," Marcus whispered, though he doubted they understood standard. The words felt inadequate against the weight of their fear. In the war, humans had been the aggressors, the destroyers who turned peaceful worlds into graveyards. To these children, he represented everything they had learned. To fear, the 4-armed child stepped forward, its movements fluid yet cautious. It pointed to Marcus's medical kit, then to itself, then to the others. Despite the language barrier, the message was clear. They needed help. Marcus nodded slowly, his heart aching at the trust this simple gesture represented. He had found them, these lost children of dead worlds, and somehow he would have to prove that not all humans were monsters. Asterisk. The first night Marcus spent in the cavern, he learned the true meaning of vigilance. The children, 17 in total, he discovered took turns watching him while the others slept. They had created a remarkable hidden society within the abandoned station, using their diverse abilities to survive in the most hostile environment imaginable. The 4-armed child, whom Marcus began calling Elder in his mind, seemed to be their leader despite appearing no older than 12 in human years. During the day, Marcus observed their routines with growing amazement. A pair of twins with gossamer wings could phase through solid matter, allowing them to scout the upper levels for supplies and threats. Their terror of loud noises became apparent When a piece of debris fell, both children immediately vanished. Through the floor, reappearing minutes later with tears streaming down their faces. Another child, whose skin was covered in symbiotic organisms that glowed with shifting patterns, served as their communications hub. Marcus realized the light. Displays were a sophisticated language, one that had been silenced by trauma. The children's fear of him was palpable, but not universal. The youngest, a creature with large eyes and downy feathers that changed color with emotion, seemed curious about Marcus despite the others' warnings. When Marcus opened his medical kit to tend to a child's infected wound, the little one crept closer, its feathers cycling through shades of cautious yellow and purple. Elder approached with obvious reluctance, pointing to the wounded child, a being whose lower body resembled a centaur's, covered in chitinous plates that had been cracked by some old injury. The wound was severely infected, and without treatment, the child would die. Marcus worked carefully, cleaning and dressing the injury, while Elder translated his actions through complex hand gestures to the others. That evening, as Marcus shared his emergency rations with the group, he began to understand the scope of their tragedy. Through a combination of basic pictographs, drawn in the luminescent moss and Elder's broken standard, he learned their stories. They came from 7 different worlds, all devastated by the war. Some had watched their parents die in human orbital bombardments. Others had been separated from their families during evacuation chaos. A few had no memory of their origins, too young when their worlds burned. The most heartbreaking was a child whose species communicated through melodic harmonics. According to Elder, she hadn't made a sound since arriving at the station 8 months ago. Her throat bore scars that suggested violence, and her eyes held the hollow look Marcus recognized from shell-shocked soldiers. She was literally voiceless, her people's beautiful song silenced by human cruelty. Marcus found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the war. The official reports spoke of military targets and strategic necessity, but these children told a different story. They had survived genocide, their entire species reduced to scattered orphans hiding in the galaxy's forgotten corners. The weight of collective human guilt pressed down on him like a physical force. That night, as the children settled into their sleeping alcoves among the glowing vines, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He activated his emergency beacon briefly, not to call for rescue, but to send a message to the outside world. He told the Reconstruction Authority that the station was completely abandoned and unsuitable for salvage. It was a lie that could cost him his career, but these children needed time to heal, and he needed time to prove that humans could be more than destroyers. The youngest child, feathers now glowing soft blue in the darkness, had fallen asleep against Marcus's arm. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than guilt about his species' actions. Here, in this hidden sanctuary, he would try to become the protector these children needed, not the destroyer they feared. 2 weeks. Into his stay, Marcus began to see glimpses of who these children had been before the war stole their innocence. The transformation started with small moments, a brief flash of bioluminescent laughter from the communications child, tentative exploration of his medical supplies by curious hands, and the gradual shortening of the distance they maintained. From him, the breakthrough came when scavengers arrived at the station. Marcus was teaching Elder basic wound treatment when the phase twins materialized through the floor, their gossamer wings quivering with panic. Their light patterns were frantic, and even without understanding the language, Marcus knew they'd spotted danger. Elder's forearms moved in rapid coordination, organizing the younger children into hidden alcoves while the older ones prepared primitive weapons. Marcus grabbed his emergency sidearm and moved toward the main tunnel. Through the station's damaged sensors, he could see 3 figures in salvage gear methodically working through the upper levels. Scavengers were common in the post-war period, desperate people stripping abandoned facilities for anything valuable. But these children couldn't be discovered. The galaxy wasn't ready for the truth about the war's youngest survivors. Asterisk, the lead scavenger, was a Terran, his augmented eyes scanning for valuable metals. Behind him, two aliens, a Corvin and what appeared to be a Zelanti, carried plasma cutters and detection equipment. They moved with the efficient ruthlessness of people who had learned that compassion was a luxury they couldn't afford. Out Marcus positioned himself at a choke point in the corridor, his weapon drawn but concealed. "This section's unstable," he called. Out, his voice echoing through the metal passages. "Radiation leak from the reactor core. I'm a medic, barely got clear myself." The Terran's augmented eyes focused on Marcus with suspicious intensity. "Scans show this area's clean. You alone down here?" "Came to salvage medical supplies. Found nothing but death." Marcus let exhaustion seep into his voice. It wasn't difficult. The war took everything worth taking. Behind him, Marcus could sense the children's terror. They had survived by hiding, but now their sanctuary was threatened. The scavenger's equipment could easily detect the heat signatures and modified atmosphere of the hidden cavern. Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. "Look," he said, holstering his weapon with deliberate casualness. "I've got some medical supplies I'm willing to trade. Pain medications, surgical tools worth more than scrap metal these days." He was gambling that greed would override curiosity. The negotiation that followed was tense but successful. Marcus traded half his medical supplies for the scavenger's agreement to mark this section as cleared and uninhabitable. As their voices faded up the corridor, he realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the responsibility he'd just fully accepted. When he returned to the cavern, the children were waiting for him. Elder stepped forward, all four arms working in a gesture Marcus had never seen before. The communication child's skin flared with brilliant patterns of gold and white. Even the voiceless singer stepped from the shadows, her scarred throat working soundlessly, but her eyes bright with something that might have been hope. They had watched him choose them over his own safety, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted. The youngest child, feathers now cycling through every color in the spectrum, approached him with something in her small hands. It was a crude drawing made with luminescent moss, a figure that was unmistakably human, surrounded by smaller figures of different species. Above them all, she had drawn stars. Marcus knelt to accept the gift, and for the first time since arriving, the children moved closer rather than away. They were still afraid trauma couldn't be erased in a moment, but they were no longer alone in their fear. The human they had dreaded had become the guardian they needed, and in protecting them, Marcus had found something he thought the war had taken from him forever: the possibility of redemption. That night, as alien lullabies hummed softly through the cavern's bioluminescent glow, Marcus began planning not just for their survival, but for their future. Asterisk, Marcus's biggest challenge wasn't medical, it was communication. Each species had its own complex methods of expression, and trauma had silenced or distorted many of them. The communication child, whom he had started calling Prism for the way her skin reflected light, had been trying to teach him the basics of her people's visual language. But her patterns were muted, hesitant, like someone afraid to speak too loudly. The breakthrough came during a supply run. Marcus had been making periodic trips to the upper levels, carefully retrieving materials they needed while maintaining the fiction that the station was abandoned. On one such trip, he discovered something extraordinary in the station's hydroponics, a single seedling that had somehow survived the facility's abandonment. It was from Prism's homeworld, a plant that her people had cultivated for millennia. When Marcus presented the tiny plant to Prism, her skin erupted in cascades of color so brilliant it illuminated the entire cavern. The other children gathered around, their own bioluminescent responses creating a symphony of light. For the first time, Marcus saw joy in their alien features, pure, uncomplicated happiness that transcended species barriers. Prism's patterns became more complex as she told the others about her people's gardens, her skin painting pictures of floating cities where plants and architecture grew together in perfect harmony. The youngest child's feathers blazed with excited oranges and golds, while elders' scarred skin showed the faintest shimmer of approval. But it was the voiceless singer who surprised everyone. As Prism's light story reached its crescendo, the scarred child stepped forward and, for the first time since Marcus had known her, made a sound. It was barely a whisper, cracked and uncertain, but it was unmistakably musical. The other children froze, afraid to break the spell. Marcus knelt beside the singer, careful not to move too quickly. "What's your name?" he asked gently, though he knew she might not understand the words. Her voice, when it came, was like wind through crystal chimes. "Lyra," she whispered in heavily accented standard. My name is Lyra." The name seemed to unlock something in the others. One by one, they began to share their names, their stories, their dreams of the worlds they had lost. Vex, the four-armed leader, spoke of his people's ritual scarification and how each mark represented a family member. The phase twins Shimmer and Shade described their homeworld's floating mountains, where their people built cities that existed partially in other dimensions. The centaur-like child, Cairn, traced patterns in the moss that showed his people's vast underground libraries. Marcus realized that in learning their names, he was also learning to see them not as victims or aliens, but as individuals with rich cultures and personal histories. They weren't just survivors. They were the living repositories of entire civilizations. As the days passed, the children began to open up about their abilities. Vex's scarification wasn't just cultural. It was a form of biotechnology that allowed him to interface with various systems. Shimmer and Shade's phasing ability was actually a form of dimensional shifting that their people had used for both exploration and protection. Prism's light patterns weren't just communication. They were a form of living art that could influence emotions and even heal psychological trauma. But with the revelations came new challenges. Several of the children had been experimenting with their abilities when the war began, and they had developed dangerous instabilities. Cairn's chitinous plates were growing too quickly, threatening to crush his internal organs. One of the younger children, a being with crystalline skin, was actually slowly solidifying a stress response that would eventually kill him if not treated. Marcus found himself becoming not just a guardian, but a xenobiologist, engineer, and therapist all at once. He worked with Vex to understand the biotechnology, collaborated with Prism to develop new communication methods, and slowly, carefully, began to address the psychological trauma that affected them all. The most difficult case was Lyra, her people's. Songs weren't just music. They were a form of empathic communication that allowed them to share emotions and memories directly. The humans who had captured her had deliberately damaged her vocal cords to prevent her from calling for help or coordinating with others. But as Marcus worked with her, he discovered that her ability was slowly returning, and with it, her capacity to help the others heal. By the end of the month, the cavern had been transformed. The children had used their abilities to create a living space that was both functional and beautiful. Bioluminescent plants provided light and food. Dimensional pockets created by the twins offered secure storage. Prism's light patterns had been woven into the walls themselves, creating a constantly shifting display that told the story of their lost worlds. And at the center of it all, Marcus found himself becoming something he had never expected, not just a protector, but a bridge between species, a translator of pain into hope. Asterisk.